What is poppin', y'all? Welcome back to the Liverpool versus Manchester United podcast and some unfortunate news for Liverpool. So let's get into it first. All right, so straight off the bat, Nabil Fekir, the transfer fell through. Now, going back and looking at this, if you've been following this situation, this is essentially what happened. Let me give you the rundown. All right. So Fekir has been scouted by Liverpool for probably the past year or so. I mean, they've known of him, but they've been trying to sign him for the past year or so. Now, Fekir sustained various amounts of injuries, all to his knee. I'm not sure whether it's his right or his left, but anyhow. Um, in 2015, he suffered an ACL tear. He tore his anterior cruciate ligament, which connects the femur to the tibia. It's responsible for a lot of twisting and things like that. So getting an injured is very significant for a soccer player, considering that you have to be balanced. You're not just moving forward and back. You're going side to side. You're playing defense, quick movements, turning, pivoting, all that good stuff. So he essentially what they do for this surgery is they will take a piece of tendon from a muscle around the leg. Most of the time, it's the hamstring. The reason they do that is because, of course, the ligaments can rebuild themselves, or the tendons can rebuild themselves. They heal, and the body over time, especially if it's just like not a complete tear, of course, the body rebuilds itself. Just like when you're working out and you're building muscle, same idea, right? So the skin graft worked. They reconstructed the ACL, and then this is how most of them are done, especially in the reconstructive surgery. Now, given his age at the time, I think he was 22 at the time. I was looking into the medical history and why this was such a blowing or a deal breaker for Liverpool, because plenty of players have had injuries in the injuries in the past, whether it be ACL or whatever. And there's one thing I could see right on the surface. The first thing is that all of the injuries had come to this knee. He had ACL reconstruction in 2015, and then successive injuries included like contusions, i.e., a bruise, and I think something else, but nothing too serious, nothing that kept him out or he needed surgery for. But looking at some of the information that I'm reading here on This Is Anfield, so I gave you the rundown of how they do the surgery. Now, there are two methods, right? So there's an autograft, which is when you take tendon from your body, i.e., like your muscle, and repair another part of your body with that tendon. Uh, you know, excuse me, autograft. And then there's taking tendon from an organ donor, which is an allograft. Now, here, I'm trying to pull up some of this info, but essentially when you take it from another person, because that tendon isn't of your body's origin, right? There's obviously a higher fail rate when you're of re-tearing it, of the ACL not completely healing and not getting back to 100%. So those allografts are associated, I'm reading here, it says associated with a higher failure rate, particularly in younger, more active patients. So, but what's interesting is that I'm pretty sure he had an autograft taken from his body. He didn't have a donor. But you know what? I just want to double check because, that's weird. But anyway, so they have a higher failure rate. So looking at it from Liverpool's perspective, taking a young individual, remember I said that these particular surgeries have a higher fail rate in younger people, especially athletes, because you're not like a normal person just walking, going to work. As soon as you are better, you're immediately back out on the soccer field doing what originally injured you in the first place. So it's a very different situation. It's an outlier situation. So from Liverpool's perspective, they're looking at this injury and saying, all right, is it worth it, given that the failure rate of this surgery is higher in his demographic, meaning he's young, athletic, and for the amount of money that they're paying for this, if you think about a 50 million pound deal, which is like 70 something or 80 something million US dollars, it is not worth it. That risk, the risk reward is too significant. Say you get this player in, right? And he hasn't been injured, he's been consistent since he had the surgery. But say he re-tears that. And Liverpool, this came up in the medical, right? And instead of doing what they did, which was they kind of stepped back and reevaluated the situation and decided to either stop it altogether or push it to a later date. Imagine if they actually signed him and then all that money, 50 million pounds, 80 million US dollars of thereabouts, and he re-tears it, all that money is down the drain. I mean, maybe not down the drain because he's coming back, but that's a whole year recovery process, right? I mean, for athletes, 6 to 9 months is generally the accepted for athletes, considering they're going to therapy a lot more than the average Joe, right? But I think to kind of bring it all into frame here, Liverpool did the right thing. Okay. I work in the medical field and I see how these injuries affect players and or not even players, just people, and how debilitating they can be, and how important it is to recover properly and to rehab properly and improve body mechanics, improve overall muscular health, strength, and that doesn't just include around the knee. That's everywhere: hip, quad, hamstring, calf, anterior tib, foot, all that stuff is important to maintaining the integrity of the reconstructed ACL. Now, you can actually go on without an ACL. It's there for support, but you can actually go through everyday life without an ACL. For example, if you say it was reconstructed and then each time it's reconstructed, it fails. Say it never properly heals. You just go about it. The other muscles kick in to support the knee, the hamstring, quad mainly. So the body just fixes itself. But when you're talking about millions of dollars and a professional athlete, this is a very sticky situation. And I don't blame Liverpool for not following through with the deal. But reading some of these other articles online, Liverpool may not necessarily be done with the deal. From what I'm reading is that they realized, they looked at the medical and they identified the um, operated on ligament because they already knew about the injury given his medical history. And they stepped back for a second, and at first they were like, okay, that's fine. But once they got word from the doctor that did the surgery, once they did some investigating, they kind of stepped back. And this was after the fee was already agreed, right? Obviously, because he was in there for a medical. After the fee was agreed, they stepped back and they kind of said to themselves, wait a minute, given his injury, and it wasn't strictly monetarily, they didn't want just a cheaper deal. They wanted a fair deal and one that reflected the risk that they're taking by taking on a player who had an ACL reconstruction. So, I don't blame, they saw the injury and they saw the risk. They stepped back, they said, let's reevaluate the deal. The Lyon president was not having any of that. And how could you blame him after the dragging on the negotiations and finally agreeing a deal? And then the other party calls you and says, hey, look, let's renegotiate. We found some stuff we didn't like. He was like, oh, hell no. He said, this is done. But we all, based on, if you're following the situation, we know that the Lyon president has a history of being a very, very picky about his transfers, very, very methodical, very hard to negotiate with. So that's why I personally don't. I think Liverpool will go for him in the future, but only if the deal reflects the risk they're taking. Maybe knocking off a few million, maybe more. Or maybe having a clause in there that they only get a certain amount of money when he plays a certain amount of games, right, in a season. Which would make sense because naturally, if he's healthy, he's going to play a lot of games. And if he's not, then he doesn't reach that mark. They don't have to pay. The thing is, though, The Lyon president knows this guy because he's an academy product. He may not want to take that risk, and then maybe all this has been discussed already, and maybe that's why the deal fell through. We're not sure. The big question moving forward is how will Liverpool and how will Klopp alike approach the signing? Because a lot of people were saying this signing was the one to replace Coutinho. So what else does he do? Does he do what he did with Van Dijk? Does he wait until Van Dijk can sign, right? He waited it out. He could have bought a center back in the summer, but he waited the extra months, bought him in the winter transfer window, or in the January transfer window, and he was worth it. He paid a little extra, right? Or a lot of extra. He's the most defensive or most expensive defender ever, but he got the right guy in. Does he do the same thing with Fekir? Now, granted, these are different circumstances. You know, it's an injury issue, not so much the host club willing to sell the player. Do you take that risk as Liverpool? Do you wait and sign him, or do you go for your second best option? And we're not really sure at this point. Right now, we're approaching the World Cup. I don't think any deals are. I'm sure deals are being discussed, but I'm sure they wanted to get the Fekir deal done before the World Cup. And now that it hasn't happened, they were putting all their time and energy into that. I really don't think that anyone will be signed prior to Thursday. That's just my opinion. I think there will be moves made after the World Cup, but you know Klopp, he wants to get the new players in early. That way they can start on July 1st training in preseason, getting into shape, getting their fitness right, because a Klopp team plays at such a higher intensity than any other team in the Premier League and in the world, for that matter. You can't just take a player, throw him into your side, and expect him to play 90 minutes at the intense, high-pressure pace that Liverpool play. So I think that's exactly why he wanted to get him in early. That way he could go to the World Cup and come back and then just start training, getting in shape, and the World Cup would keep him in shape. So interesting stuff with that transfer. Now, going on to Keita and Fabinho will be players on July 1st. They'll pull on that Liverpool red. And let's do a hypothetical. Fekir's not even in the picture anymore. We never sign him. We're looking at a midfield of, most likely, this is what I'm thinking. You got Wijnaldum on the right in the midfield three. You got Fabinho and Henderson rotating in that holding midfielder, that defensive midfielder, and then you have Keita and will Milner play? When Chamberlain comes back, obviously he's going to rotate there, and he's obviously going to rotate the field or the midfield the most to keep him healthy, just like he did with this past season. But so most likely, I'm looking at, if I'm Klopp, you ease Fabinho into the side. You start with Henderson and you ease Fabinho in there. And he's obviously going to rotate him. But if I'm picking one game, one game, one side, based on what I've seen, right? Strictly not going on morale or anything like that. You've got to put Fabinho in there. You've got to put Keita and Wijnaldum. Wijnaldum's ball retention is so good that I really think he's going to be an integral part of the midfield this season. Maybe Milner too. We're not sure. But who else could we possibly sign midfield-wise? I remember seeing links with Peter Zielinski from Napoli. This was a while back, not recently. But if you're looking at our midfield as far as injuries go, Lallana obviously could play there when Chamberlain comes back and he's healthy. We were kind of depleted at the end of the season. So in my next podcast, I want to review our options for midfield and who we could sign if it's not Fekir. Obviously, we know we have Fabinho and Keita coming in, but the midfield is the most important part of Klopp's system. I mean, that midfield is box to box all game pressing, and they're moving constantly. So you need players that aren't only have the stamina to do that, but also the skill to work with the front three. Fekir had all that. Maybe not so much. I have to watch him more, but the fitness there, he may have had to work on that. But I'll tell you someone we will really miss until he's healthy again is Oxlade-Chamberlain. I'm going to talk about him for just a second, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. But Chamberlain, he had a knee ligament injury as well, though he didn't completely tear it and needs I don't or he may have had surgery, but his recovery process isn't it's not like an ACL reconstruction. I think he just had a damage to his ACL maybe or another ligament within the knee. Normally, if it's ACL, they'll say that, but if it's not, they may just say knee ligament damage because there are a lot of ligaments in there. So I heard the term, I heard the figure 5 months. Not 100% sure on that, but Chamberlain is excellent as far as a versatile midfield attacking player, right? He plays that left role in the midfield three, and he gets forward, kind of how he pretty much what Coutinho was doing before he went to Barcelona, and he was great at it. He started coming into his own, especially in the Champions League against City, and that, or against City in the Premier League, and then in the Champions League. But that injury, it almost felt like we were missing a very important part of our midfield, a fast, intense player that kept the pace, right? Kind of how Mane and does. Mane's he drops back a little bit, he'll press, but he keeps the pace up. He's a quick player. Same thing with Salah. So we're gonna miss him, but I think with the additions of Keita and Fabinho, we have enough midfield options to the point where we can do without signing a Fekir and also deal with the Chamberlain injury until he comes back. I think Wijnaldum is stepping in there great. Henderson can play all three. He doesn't have to play the holding midfield. He's played everyone before. And you can also have Lallana in there. A lot of people forgetting about Lallana. He's kind of like he didn't really have this season. He was a ghost because of the injuries. But the season before, if y'all remember, Lallana was the man. Lallana was a key midfielder in Klopp's system, and that's why he signed him to a 5-year extension recently. And that's because he's useful. I think he's like 29 or 30, but eventually he's going to have to go somewhere. But I think for this upcoming season, we're going to utilize Lallana, Wijnaldum, Chamberlain when he gets healthy. Maybe even Milner. I'm not sure. He probably won't get as much game time. But I'm very excited to see Keita and Fabinho and how they all fit into that system. So, to kind of wrap it up here, we know that Liverpool but backed out on the deal to sign Fekir based on the knee injury. And I'm going to say it again, I understand. I understand why they did it, and I agree to a certain extent. I didn't read that he had an ACL injury, and I was immediately like, "Oh my God, no, we can't sign him. He has an ACL, or he had an ACL injury." But I can see where the maybe not skepticism, that's not the right word, but the what's the word I'm looking? I will go with skepticism because I can't think of anything right now. So that's where the skepticism came from, and I think Liverpool did the right thing. I think that monetarily, it's a good decision, and I think that if we really do want Fekir down the line, we'll probably get him because, like I said, he's been on our radar for about a year or so, give or take. And who knows? What if he has a great World Cup? He's healthy. Klopp says, you know what? Let's go get him. Why not? I'd be excited to have the guy. Thanks for listening, y'all. Appreciate it. Hope y'all have a good night. Till next time.